All right. So, some of us have already chatted a bit, but for those of you who are just joining, welcome. Thank you for taking your time this morning to meet with us for this webinar. Hopefully you find it helpful and prepares you for the administrative review. So we'll go ahead and just kind of do a quick run through of today's agenda. So who is CNR? We're going to do a quick introduction of CNR. That is short for See and Resource. We have a couple of team members with us today, so you'll have a chance to meet a couple of us. But we are a group of people that specialize in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, as well as some of those supplemental programs that you might be operating. Today, we're going to talk about the administrative review from the perspective of USDA and what their prescribed process looks like. We'll then discuss each area of the review and some documents that our team might be requesting from you. And it's just really to confirm that your programs are operating in ways that are compliant with regulatory requirements. Again, we want the process to feel as less of a burden as possible, and then also helpful. We want you to know that we are here to help you along the way. You will be assigned a review specialist who will be your go-to person who can help you throughout the review. So See and Resource, our motto is there for you to look at. We exist to promote responsible oversight of federal nutrition programs through system expertise, thoughtful and caring employees, forward-looking customer service, and overall concern for the health and well-being of America's children. You see the map of the U.S. there, and those states that are highlighted in yellow are all states that we do work in. So here you'll meet a few of our team members. The National School Lunch Program, or NSLP team, is led by Kendra Burton. We have Jacqueline Piskowski, who is our Director of Process Management and Improvement. And then we also have Catherine Rippey, who's on the call with us today. You'll get to hear from her for a few minutes. She is the Director of Financial Reviews. Other team members are the contract coordinators, and that is me. We have contract support specialist, senior review specialist, senior observation specialist. We have a team of menu analysts and another team of financial review specialists, and then also the quality assurance specialists. Okay, so what is the administrative review? For many of you, this might not be your first time around. For some of you, maybe it is your first time. So we're just going to cover some few basics real quick. Directly from the USDA, you can see at the top there, the administrative review is the assessment of the School Food Authority's administration of the NSLP, which is National School Lunch Program, SBP, which is School Breakfast Program, and other school nutrition programs. So it is a review of program operations. We look at things like benefit issuance, which is like your free and reduced applications, claims, your civil rights, wellness, like that's your local school wellness policy, and professional standards. We'll also take a look at finance and purchasing. So though that area will include things like your paid lunch equity, nonprofit school food service account, non-program food revenue, procurement procedures, and documentation. And then we also look at your meal service, and that's really where all of these other areas come together. They all kind of are part of the whole program, and the meal service is like the culmination of everything. So when we come on site, we're going to observe that meal service. We're going to look at your meal components, your point of service, counting and claiming, and food safety.
Yeah.
So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the USDA approach to the administrative review, we'll kind of take a look at CNR's review process and the way we've kind of broken things down. Again, we feel like we found a pretty good way of making the review as simple as we can. We do understand there is a lot of documentation required for the administrative review. So to some extent, it's just unavoidable, but we've done the best that we can do to try and make the process as seamless as we can. So the review process with CNR will start with notification of the administrative review. So you guys should have already received a welcome call from a team member just confirming the week of on-site, not necessarily the day, but you should have already received kind of the beginning pieces of communication. The next step will be an introduction call. And that will be conducted by our senior review specialist who will be assigned to your review. And again, that person is going to be your go-to person throughout the review process. So you will get to know that person pretty well. You'll have their contact information, and that's the person you can refer to whenever you have questions or need some clarification or assistance along the way. Following that introduction call, you will receive an email that includes your official notification letter, and it's going to have some additional details pertaining to your review, as well as due dates for the different pieces of review. The next step is the financial review call. So that is where you will coordinate with your senior review specialist to sit down with our financial review specialist, and they'll go through the financial review with you. They'll actually complete parts of the review tool with you over that call and answer any questions you might have. Catherine will speak a little bit more about that later, but we find that call has been very, very helpful because that can be sometimes the trickier part of the administrative review. So after that financial review call, we kind of move into the documentation collection phase. Again, when you get that notification email, there's going to be several attachments, and one of those attachments will be a document checklist with established due dates. So we've kind of broken it down in a way to where it's in pieces. You're not necessarily having to upload everything all at one time. We've kind of broken it down to where it's just certain chunks at once. Or at a time. So all the requested documents will be due by the applicable due dates. We will share with you how to get those documents to us, but it's pretty seamless. Then the next piece is the on-site review. That is the day that we come on site to see your program. We do the meal service observation. We conduct a simple like kitchen walkthrough. We'll collect any outstanding documentation if there is any. Hopefully there's not, but we will collect on site if needed. And then the final piece is the final report. So that is where you'll see all of your review findings, if there are any, in one place, and then the next steps in correcting those findings. So we'll kind of jump into the first area of the administrative review, and that is certification and benefit issuance. So again, this is referring primarily to your free and reduced process. So if you are collecting free and reduced applications, we'll take a look at that. If you are operating under the Community Eligibility Program or CEP, there are just a couple pieces of documentation we'll need to take a look at for that. So really, certification and benefit issuance is how are you determining free and reduced eligibility? And then was that eligibility correctly determined? And then is that eligibility determination, so the benefit, is that being issued appropriately? Is it being transferred to the point of service as it should be? So documents that we would ask to see for this area of review are student rosters or master lists, direct certification match results, household income applications, any extended eligibility you might have, any homeless, migrant, runaway list that you might have, and notification letters that you've used to notify households of either benefit approval or denial. So what can you do to prepare at this point? So the first thing you might want to start with before your review actually gets off the ground is just checking who your officials are. And when I say officials, I'm referring to the people involved in the approving of the free and reduced applications. So who's the person who's receiving those applications and then going through and making those determinations based on the income information provided. So just double check who that is in your organization. And then are they reviewing applications appropriately? So you might want to do like a double check or a little bit of a confirmation review of applications and just make sure that they are complete and that the determinations have been made accurately. And then double check your benefit issuance master list. Make sure that students who were approved for benefits are actually receiving the correct benefit. Just do a double check of all that. So that kind of takes us into verification. We do conduct a review of your verification process. And honestly, at this point, you should have verification wrapped up. The due date was yesterday. So hopefully that's not a surprise to anybody. So we will make sure that you completed the correct verification process. And we'll ask a series of questions related to that. And then we'll take a look at your verification results and how those results were handled. If changes were necessary or anything like that, we'll just do like a follow-up on that. And we'll also take a look at your verification reporting. So your verification summary report, which is probably what you're getting ready to work on now or soon anyway. So we'll make sure that your verification processes and your verification results were correctly reported. So documentation that we will ask to see are the applications that were selected for verification, the notification letters and results letters that were used for those households, the documentation that was collected from those households, and then also the verification summary report. So things you can do now to start preparing, again, check who your officials are. So typically with the verification process, you would have a confirming official. So make sure that that person knows that they were the confirming official and completed their part of that process. You would have a verifying official, all that. So just make sure that that is all in line. You can start pulling all of your documentation for verification. It's probably all pretty handy right now. You see that there's a reference here to error-prone applications. There's an asterisk there because that may or may not apply. You may not have had error-prone. You may not have had to conduct verification on error-prone applications. But if you did, make sure that those are all prepared for review. Again, do a review of your applications and the verification of those applications. Was everything complete? If somebody who did not conduct the review or verification of those applications were to look at it, would they be able to put it all together and would it make sense to them? And then also, this is kind of a big one, check for signatures. Make sure that everybody has signed off where they need to sign off. Now we'll talk a little bit about community eligibility provision, or CEP. What we would review in this area would be like your identified student percentage. We'll take a look at some documentation to ensure that the ISP was correctly determined. We'll make sure that your meal claiming is done appropriately. So is your ISP being correctly applied to your meal counts? And documentation for this area would consist of like your enrollment list from your enrollment year, April 1 of your enrollment year. So we're going to make sure that that documentation is being maintained according to record keeping requirements. So documentation that we will be requesting, again, is the enrollment data. So this complete student enrollment list from April 1 of the CEP enrollment year. And then also the direct certification list and extended eligibility homeless migrant runaway from April 1 of that enrollment year. And then your claiming percentages. So what can you do to prepare now? You can start organizing your data. You can go ahead and pull that enrollment list that we're going to verify that you are maintaining. You can have that ready to go, organize your documentation. Some of this is probably filed away somewhere and you might have to go locate it and confirm your claiming percentages and that they are accurate and being used accurately. Okay, so we'll also be reviewing your meal counting and claiming and ensuring that everything is being done appropriately in that area. That's a big piece of review. It's pretty important. Obviously this is what you're using to for payment to submit your claim for reimbursement. So we want to make sure that everything is being done correctly. So we will take a look at your meal counting and claiming system. So how are you counting meals at the point of service? For reference, point of service, I mean, probably most of you already know this, but point of service is where the student is physically receiving that meal. That is what we consider the point of service. So how is that meal being counted and claimed at that point? We'll ensure that we'll ensure accurate submission of claims. We will ensure that there are internal controls. So do you have edit checks? If you have an electronic point of service system, it's possible that the edit check is just built in to your electronic POS. Probably you have reports to pull for that. If you don't have an electronic POS system and you're doing things manually, how are you confirming that those meal counts are accurate? What is your internal control there? And then meal charging. We'll ask to see your meal charge policy. And then we'll ensure that it's being followed appropriately, that it meets regulations and requirements and things like that. So we will ask to see a copy of your meal charge policy. So that kind of takes me into the documents. We'll be reviewing your meal counting procedures. We'll take a look at your daily meal counts, your daily edit checks, and again, your meal charge policy. So to prepare now, you can ensure that you have edit checks in place, whether that is electronic or a manual method. You can review your charging policy, make sure that it's current and that what your policy says is what's actually in practice. So take a look at that. And then you can go observe your point of service, your POS. If you are working in the kitchens on a daily basis, maybe your role has you in the kitchen daily, you might need to ask for somebody outside of the kitchen to come observe your point of service. But just confirm that everything is operating as it should, kind of pretend like you are a reviewer and, like we would come on site and review things, just kind of put yourself in those shoes and make sure that your point of service is done correctly and accurately. So we will also be determining meal pattern compliance. This is also a pretty big piece of review. So we will verify that the required components are being served or offered. We'll confirm the daily and weekly minimums. So those meal pattern components are the correct portion sizes being provided on a daily basis, and then of course over the course of the week. And is that appropriate for each age group? If you are operating offer versus serve, we'll also confirm that that is being operated appropriately. Are students selecting reimbursable meals under offer versus serve? Do you have the appropriate signage available if you are operating offer versus serve? Things like that. So documentation that will be requested are completed production records, food labels and CN labels or any type of like product formulation statement, and standardized recipes. I will go ahead and mention when you get communication from your senior review specialist, you will be notified of a week of menu review. So these production records, food labels, standardized recipes, it will all be for that week of menu review. So you won't be having to pull everything for all of your menus. It'll be that one kind of week that we concentrate on. So what can you do now to prepare? Make sure that records are being maintained. Are your production records being completed on a daily basis? Are they being completed accurately and in full? So maybe take a look at those production records and make sure that everything looks good on those. You can start collecting food labels. If you know there's some items, maybe they're new this year, you haven't quite got the documentation for those yet, go ahead and collect those food labels, those nutrition fact labels, child nutrition labels, formulation statements, anything supporting how that food is crediting towards the meal pattern. And take a look at your standardized recipes. Maybe you need to create some standardized recipes for some things that you're serving. So go ahead and make sure all of that is in order and ready for review. So I'm going to let Catherine take the lead here. She's going to kind of go into a little bit more detail regarding the financial pieces of the review.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Okay. So with resource management, we'll discuss resource management and procurement because there is some overlap there. And resource management, we tend to find that, yes, there's lots of questions on review areas, but resource management is one that has a lot of questions. And so that is where that financial review call comes in that Katie mentioned earlier in the timeline of the events. We have found that by going through that initial resource management risk assessment, which we will send to you, and those 700 series questions, if you go into the online system and go to review tracking and then review forms, all of your review questions that you'll answer will be there. And these are those 700 series questions for resource management. And half of the battle is understanding what is this question actually asking and how does it pertain to my local organization. And so that is the goal of the financial review call, is to walk you through those questions, see how they apply to you locally. Any answers that you do have for us on that day, then we'll make note of them. We'll send you a follow-up email, but anything that you need to get to us later, that's fine too. We really just want to talk through each of those questions and kind of get you on the right path to answer those. For resource management, all of the financial documents that we'll look at that we'll go over in just a minute, but things like that ledger, statement of revenues and expenditures, balance sheets, all of those documents are going to be for school year 22-23. So there are a couple of things, like when we talk about paid lunch equity and your non-program foods, if you have anything other than reimbursable meals, those specific documents, we will look at this year, but all of your financials and all of the rest of that review will be for school year 22-23. So we'll go through that on that financial review call. After that financial review call, we will send you a summary of that call. And it will list any of the questions that still need responses on there. And then it will also be a more tailored document list for you. So when that senior review specialist originally reaches out, there will be several attachments on the email, and one of them will have document due dates on it. And that is a very generic list right now. And so after that financial review call, we will tailor that list. So for example, if you are, completely CEP, there is no paid lunch equity tool. And so we'll remove those documents that don't apply and send you that list after that call. And resource management is a risk assessment. So those initial questions that we go through are just that. They're initial questions. And sometimes that's it. Once we get through those questions, there's no additional questions that are needed, no additional documents that are needed outside of that normal list. But depending upon your responses to some of those questions, then we may have additional questions or additional documents needed. And you will see those referred to as comprehensive reviews. And so some people panic when they hear comprehensive review. Don't panic. It just means that we're going to ask a few additional questions about a section. So again, for example, if you answer in that original set of questions that you do sell items other than reimbursable meals, so you have a la carte, then automatically we have to ask a few additional questions in the form of a comprehensive review in that section. So I tell people, don't panic when you hear that word. It doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong. There are just these risk factors that USDA sets up that some of them, if they're generated, we have to ask a little bit more. So there is that kind of back and forth, and there can be different phases. And again, you may have no comprehensive reviews. You may have 2 or 3. It just depends upon, locally how you all are operating and how those questions are answered. And so as far as documents, as I mentioned, those basic financial documents, so things like a detailed general ledger that should be all of the transactions in and out of the food service account last year, that statement of revenues and expenditures, the balance sheet, all of those will be for school year 22-23. And then if there are additional documents, again, we will let you know, but really those are the documents that I would go ahead and encourage you when we talk about preparing now. Those are documents that I would say to go ahead and start pulling and gathering, because although we might call it a detailed general ledger, it might be called something else locally. And I know that sometimes with accounting systems, reports have to be, almost built. And so do go ahead and start, working with whoever you need to get those correct reports pulled. And then just know that like paid lunch equity tool, all of those sorts of things, if they don't apply to you, they'll get removed from your list after that financial review call. As far as comprehensive review documents, there is honestly not much that you need to worry about now, because right now you don't know, and we don't know if you're going to have any of those comprehensive reviews. But I just like to give people a heads up, if you do have those comprehensive reviews and we do ask for additional documents, examples could be your revenue from non-program foods tool, where you assess compliance and that supporting documentation. If you do catering, it can be catering invoices. So I do like to let people know what's coming. I'm not a fan of surprises. So if you have comprehensive reviews, those are the types of documents that we're talking about. But of course, we will let you know if those are needed. So as far as preparing now for resource management, again, those financial documents and financial reports that you can pull from last year, I do encourage you to go ahead and start working on those. I would also encourage you to read through that initial risk assessment. As I mentioned, the senior review specialist, that will come to you. We'll send an administrative review resource guide, and it's kind of like a tips and tricks tool for each section of the review. And so if you go to the resource management section, it does have all of those questions. And then it actually has kind of like an interpretation of what does this question actually mean in language that we would all use. So that is in there. I encourage you to read it, or again, you can review those questions in the online system as well, but it does help to read through them because that is what guides the call for that financial review call. And so, no, we don't expect you to have all of the answers, but just so that you have a heads up of what will be discussed. And, if there are any answers that you can go ahead and bring to that call, then reading through that is helpful. And then the last one I say is gather your team. So again, each operation is totally unique. And in some operations, on the financial review call, you really only need, the director that might be doing finance and purchasing and everything, and that is fine. But in a lot of operations, resource management and procurement both involve, multiple people throughout your SFA. And so go ahead and let those people know that this review is coming. Go ahead and, let them know that that financial review call is very important for them to be on. We understand that people are busy. We do try to keep that call to, an hour or less. And usually it's quicker than that, just depending upon the questions that you all may have. But it is really important so that everybody's on the same page from the get-go. Everybody knows how the review will look, the expectations on there, and they can also gather their questions to have on that call. And letting people know that might be pulling all of these financial reports, that these requests will be coming in. I know that everybody has a lot on their plate. And so if we can, let people know this is coming, go ahead and discuss who will be doing what and what all will be needed, then that helps facilitate a more efficient review process as well. So with that, Katie, if you want to switch over to procurement. Awesome. So our team also will be working with you on procurement. Procurement is also of your school year 22-23. And we will begin the procurement review in that financial review call. So we're not necessarily going through and asking, all of the procurement questions on there. What we are doing is walking you through the procurement tool or procurement table. People kind of use those interchangeably. And that table or tool is online. And so if you go in and you go to compliance and procurement review tracking rather than review tracking, you can go ahead and look at that tool. But what we'll do on that financial review call is walk you through how to complete that tool. There are some nuances with it, and it is super important of how vendors are plugged into that table. And so you are really plugging vendors in based on that procurement method used rather than solely dollar amount. And that can be kind of tricky sometimes to people. And so we will go through that again, specific to your procurement locally. We'll walk you through that tool and how it should be completed. That tool or table, again, they're really the same thing. We do need to make sure that it is correct from the get-go. And so sometimes it does require, once we go to validate it, of asking questions, just because that tool is what drives the entire procurement review. And so if it's incorrectly completed, then we run the risk of having to come back to you later near the end of the review and saying, oh, wait, sorry, we need more vendor documents, or discovering that we asked you for documents that weren't needed. So the financial review specialist will likely have questions about that tool once it's completed, just because we want to make sure it is correct and reflects, what was truly done locally. So on that financial review call, we'll walk you through that tool. In order to complete that tool, you will need a vendor paid list. That's what we call it. That's what USDA calls it. I know that oftentimes that is not what it is called within each of the sponsors. And so really what that is a report of all of the vendors that food service paid last year. And so it includes a total paid to that vendor and then kind of a breakdown to that vendor. So if you spent $100,000 and there were 9 checks, then essentially it gives you, the $100,000 and indicates those 9 checks on there. And so sometimes I have seen that called a check summary or a check report. I've also seen it called a vendor history. And so again, that's one of those of figuring out what that report is called within your software, how that's being tracked. It's helpful to go ahead and figure that out now, but it really is a summary of vendors and what was paid to them last year. Once you submit that in your procurement procedures and your procurement code of conduct, that financial review specialist, as I was mentioning, will work to validate that tool, ask you if there's any questions, confirm vendors are in the right places, and then we will send you a vendor selection checklist. So I tell people, please do not start pulling all of your invoices with all of your vendors for last year. We do not need that, and I do not wish that upon you. And so we will send you a checklist that will say, here is the vendor that was selected, and here is exactly what we need for this vendor. So you don't have to start gathering all of that right now. We have USDA criteria that tells us how many vendors we have to select and what type of vendors. And so once we do that, we will send you a checklist. We'll give you time to get those documents into us, and then we'll work to review them, answer the review questions on our end. Once we get that documentation back, oftentimes, again, there are questions of just, can you explain this process to us? So there is a lot of that back and forth in the procurement review process. But we just want to make sure that, how we're answering questions and what we're reviewing actually reflects what you as the sponsor did. So as far as documents, we talked through that step one with that procurement tool, that vendor paid list, procurement procedures, and procurement code of conduct. And all of this, again, will be on that checklist that will come from your senior review specialist. But then the documents underneath that coincide with vendor selection and that documentation review, you will see that those will vary. And you, again, don't have to make note of all of these because it'll be on that checklist. But I just like to, again, let people know what types of documents we may be requesting. So micro purchase vendors, it's really just, invoices and receipts. Small purchases, so where you got quotes to obtain vendors, specifications, quotes, invoices, and receipts. And then if you have any formal procurements, this would also be the same for FSMC procurements mainly. In addition to those formal, we do have to see, like advertisement, solicitation, response from vendors, evaluation, and essentially kind of the picture of that whole procurement on there. But that's just the type of documents. Again, please don't start pulling all of these documents now. It's just to give a heads up to everybody that'll be involved in that process of what may be needed from you. So as far as what can you do to prepare now, determining those procurement methods. So what I mean by that is when we talked about that vendor pay list and when we talked about that procurement tool, we are entering vendors based on the procurement method used to procure them. So again, those purchasing thresholds are important, but the tool is based on the method. So really looking to see, we use this mainline food distributor. Did we get quotes and that's how we wound up with this vendor? Did we put out, a bid and that's how we got to this vendor? And so figuring out that method used for each of your vendor can take time if you're not tracking that along the way. And so if you're not, and you don't have that information right now, then that is very, very, very important and helpful that you go ahead and start working on that so that you have it when we begin that procurement review. And then again, I say, gather your team, figure out who within your organization will be involved in this. Sometimes it's all the same people as resource management. Sometimes, it's somebody additional. So getting them on that financial review call, letting them know that document requests are going to come in and, that we'll likely have questions, and just kind of letting them know this is beginning and this is what's to come. Getting them on that financial call really is the first super important step so that everybody starts off on the same page and is hearing the same information on that review. So with that, Katie, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. All right. So we are going to head into what we refer to as the general areas of review. Previously, what we spoke about is often referred to as the critical areas, and that's mostly just because that's the documentation and the information that is used to support your claim for reimbursement. So again, like I said, now we're going to go into more of those general areas of review. They're still just as important, but they just maybe aren't directly tied to that claim for reimbursement. So that first piece here you can see is civil rights. So we will review that you are in compliance with the civil rights requirements. Do your participants, so the students participating in your nutrition programs, do they know what their rights are? Do you have a complaint procedure, and does that complaint procedure follow the correct procedures? And then staff training. If you don't already know, but I'm sure you do, civil rights training is an annual requirement for all staff in the nutrition programs who have a responsibility or role within the program that puts them kind of in a direct direct communication or interfacing with the students. So have you met the civil rights staff training requirements? So documentation that we would ask to see is the public media release. So that is your announcement to the community, letting parents, households know that you plan to be offering nutrition programs. And then if you are not CEP and you are accepting free and reduced applications, oftentimes that media release will include information on how to apply for meal benefits. There is a template available for that on DESE's website. So I always like to recommend that when there's a state template available to try to use that. You can have your own, but you just need to make sure that it meets the requirements. We'll take a look at your program material, and there's an asterisk here because you won't necessarily be providing material just for civil rights. We'll kind of be looking at that and checking the civil rights requirements in other areas of review. So to explain that a little better, like the menus that you are posting or distributing to households, do those menus include the correct non-discrimination statement? When we take a look at your certification and benefit issuance documentation, is the correct non-discrimination statement being included on those pieces of program material and things like that. So we do kind of, as we work our way through the review, we do kind of look at everything and just make sure that that non-discrimination statement is included where it should be and appropriately. Again, we'll take a look at your civil rights complaint procedures. We'll ask to see documentation of your complaint procedures. We'll also ask if you've received any complaints. Oftentimes the answer to that is no, but if you have received complaints, we do need to make sure we follow up with that. We might also ask to see, or not might, we will ask to see medical statements that you are accepting for students with special dietary needs, and we'll just ensure that those medical statements include all the required pieces of information, particularly a signature from an authority that has prescriptive authority. So a lot of times or often you might have a chiropractor sign off on a medical statement, and that's something you just might want to double check because chiropractors do not always have prescriptive authority. So just something to be mindful of. Documentation of your civil rights training for staff. So sign-in sheets, if you had like a PowerPoint or a slideshow of that civil rights training, just any documentation that supports the civil rights training that was conducted. So things you can do now, you can make sure that your And Justice for All posters, so the AJFA for short poster, is displayed where it needs to be displayed. If it is in like a manager's kitchen or a director's office, things like that, that's great, but it needs to be displayed like where your participants can see it. So oftentimes I will just say at or near the beginning of the serving line, or at that point of service as well. Check all of your program materials, make sure that they include the correct non-discrimination statement. Again, that can be located on the DESE website, both the long and the short versions. You can take a look at your complaint procedures and make sure that they are meeting requirements. Make sure that the appropriate staff members in your organization are aware of those complaint procedures. Just make sure everything's in order with that. And ensure that your staff have been trained. Again, civil rights training for staff is an annual requirement. If you haven't conducted it already this school year, you might want to make plans to get that checked off your list. So we'll move into monitoring. So this is the on-site monitoring of your programs. If you have more than one site, you are required to conduct on-site monitoring. If you are a single site, it is not necessarily a requirement, but it is definitely an option. It's a good practice to go ahead and conduct that monitoring, even though it might not be a requirement. So on-site monitoring exists basically to ensure adequate program oversight. And we will also ask to see the on-site monitoring forms, and we'll confirm that they are completed in the correct time frame. The due date for completing your on-site monitoring is by February 1st of each school year. It's typically recommended to complete that as early in the school year as possible, just because if you do discover that there are issues or weaknesses, you ideally would be addressing those sooner rather than later, but the due date to complete on-site monitoring is February 1st. So the documentation we would ask to see are your completed on-site monitoring forms. If for some reason you haven't completed them yet for the current school year, we would ask to see last school year, just to ensure that it is typically completed. But probably for the majority of everyone on this call, your review will take place after February 1st. So we would expect to see this year. And then we'd also ask to see any documentation of corrective action or follow-up. So maybe you go out and you do your on-site monitoring and you discover that maybe there's some weaknesses at the point of service or on your serving line or something like that. So you would just want to document that in your on-site monitoring form, and then have a corrective action or a follow-up plan. And we'll just make sure that that is all documented and that a follow-up was conducted if noted that it needed to be. So what can you do now? Again, if you haven't already conducted your on-site monitoring, go ahead and make a plan to get that done. Create a schedule. If you have multiple sites, you probably need to create a schedule to get those on-site monitoring, to get those taken care of. So again, you have until February 1. Check your on-site monitoring forms for completeness and also signatures. So if you maybe are a director and you are going to one of your sites to conduct on-site monitoring, make sure that you get perhaps your kitchen manager or head cook, somebody's signature on that monitoring form. We will check to make sure that they are complete. And that's often something that we notice gets overlooked. If you are working in the kitchens, you might need to ask, again, somebody from a different area in your organization to come do the monitoring because you can't monitor yourself. So just kind of make a plan if you haven't already to complete your on-site monitoring. Okay, so next we'll talk a bit about the local school wellness policy. We do ask to see this as part of the administrative review. So the local school wellness policy are your policies to promote school wellness. So we'll just kind of take a look at it and one, make sure that it's meeting requirements, including all of the areas that it is required to include. And we'll also want to see that the local school wellness policy is meaningful and is it actually being implemented. It's great to have a policy, but if your individual school sites or buildings aren't aware that the policy even exists, it's something we would want to look into and make sure that it is being implemented. We'll also take a look at the evaluation of the local school wellness policy. So does the local school wellness policy support current practices? If your policy states one thing is that when we go on site to the school, is that what is actually in practice, or there may be some practices that go against the local school wellness policy. And then also, is the public made aware of the policy and the implementation? So oftentimes, the local school wellness policy will be posted on school websites. So that's great. Or maybe it's included with back to school paperwork, registration paperwork, student handbooks. However you are making that policy known to the public, we'll need to take a look at that. So the documentation for review, of course, would be the current local school wellness policy. Documentation of the review and updates to the local school wellness policy. And then also the most current local school wellness policy assessment that's done on a triennial basis. More often if you choose, but minimum a triennial basis. So what can you do now to prepare? You can take a look at your local school wellness policy. Again, make sure that what is written into your policy is actually what is occurring in your schools. And this might be an area where you need to involve other people in your organization. Maybe you need to get some principals involved or school officials, but just assess the wellness policy. Does it make sense for your district? And is it being implemented? And then also, again, make sure that that local school wellness policy is available to the public. So smart snacks, we will be reviewing and confirming that anything that you are selling outside of a reimbursable school lunch is in compliance with smart snack standards. So again, any food or beverage that is sold to students during the school day is subject to the smart snack standards. And this doesn't necessarily mean foods that are coming from the cafeteria. If you have school stores that are selling food and beverages to students, those are subject to smart snack standards. Certain fundraisers, if the fundraiser involves selling food or beverages to students during the school day, that would be subject to smart snack standards. Sometimes teachers might be selling snacks out of their classrooms. That would also be subject to smart snack standards. So you might just want to do some investigating and make sure that everything is in compliance. There is the opportunity to have exempt fundraisers. So do you have a way to track those? Are you tracking those? We'll just kind of take a look at that. So documentation that we would need for review are labels for your smart snack items. That is referring to like nutrition labels. And then your smart snack calculator results pages. If you haven't run your foods or beverages through the smart snack calculator and have that results page printed off, we will do that for you during the review. But that's basically the documentation supporting that your snack does indeed meet standards. And then again, any exempt fundraising documentation, we would ask to see that. So what can you do to prepare? You can contact your school officials, anybody who might be running any type of school store, if that school store is selling food and beverages, and then check for product compliance. Okay, so the next area we'll talk about is professional standards. So professional standards refers to the training standards for school nutrition employees. Will confirm that you are keeping track and meeting professional standard requirements. We'll also take a look at the hiring standards for directors. There's an asterisk here as well because hiring standards would only apply if the director has been hired since July 1st of 2015. If you have a school food service director who was hired before that, the hiring standards don't necessarily apply. So July 1 of 2015, if a director has been hired since that date, we will confirm that hiring standards were met. So documentation for review would include a roster of all food service employees, a completed professional standards tracker, training documents, so that might be your certificates of completion, slides from any training that maybe was completed online, agendas, sign-in sheets, anything you have to support the training that was completed. And then again, those documents to support the hiring of a food service director, if it's a new director hired since July 1st of 2015. So to prepare, you can make a training plan for employees. Maybe your employees have already met their professional standards requirements, and that's great. But we are not even halfway through the school year, so it's also very likely that they have some training to complete yet. So if that is the case, we would ask to see what is planned for those employees so that they complete their requirement for professional standards by the end of the school year. And then you can start organizing your training certificates and any other training documentation that you have. Food safety. So we will review a food safety plan and we'll confirm that it follows HACCP criteria. We'll also ask to see health inspections. If your health inspect, or if your local health department is not conducting 2 health inspections per school year, we'll need to see documentation that 2 were requested. We'll also take a look at your food storage practices, and just ensure that food's being stored properly and at safe temperatures. I mean, we conduct this on site during our kitchen walkthrough. We're mostly just checking some of those basic food storage procedures. You know, is the food not being stored on the floor? As mentioned there, is it being stored at safe temperatures? Is it being stored away from chemicals? Just some of those basic areas of food storage. So documents, again, we'll ask to see health inspection reports. We'll ask to see the food safety plan and temperature logs for storage areas. Now, some of these can be observed on site when we do our kitchen walkthrough. They can also be uploaded for review before we come on site. So things that you can do to prepare now are to take a look at your food safety plan. Does it need to be updated? Is it being implemented? So just kind of take a look at it, make sure that everything is good to go with your food safety plan. You can call your health department if you haven't received the 2 required health inspections per year, and you need to request those, or any other type of communication you might need to have with your health department. And also post your current health inspection reports. So your most recent health inspection report should be posted in a publicly visible location. So if you have like a bulletin board in your cafeteria, that would be fine. Or like in your serving area is great too. It just needs to be visible to the public. We will also be reviewing Buy American and ensuring that your practices meet the Buy American provision. So Buy American is referring to the use of domestic agricultural products. So are you using domestic products whenever possible? And if not, do you have the proper documentation justifying why a particular product is not domestic? So documentation would be that exception documentation. Sometimes you can get that from your vendor. Sometimes you're documenting that on your own, but just your justification for any agricultural item that is not a product of the USA. And then to prepare, you can check your produce packaging, or really any food item packaging. Maybe do like a kitchen walkthrough and just see like, or that broccoli that's in the freezer, is it a product of USA? Of course, your produce is an obvious one, but just make sure that to the best extent practicable that you are buying domestic products. And you can start contacting your suppliers. So maybe you discover that a product is not Buy American and you were unaware of that. So contact that vendor and have a discussion with them and see if you can get that product as a domestic product, or work on justifying why it is not a domestic product. So we'll also confirm that program outreach is being conducted as part of the review. So program outreach is referring to school breakfast and summer food service. So are you conducting outreach for those two areas? And basically that means, do families know it is available? So if you are posting your breakfast menus, maybe on social media or on a school website, that could be considered outreach. Letting families know that breakfast is available in the cafeteria or wherever in the mornings and the times that it is available. It's typically part of program outreach. So we will ask to see documentation that supports what you've done as far as outreach goes. For summer food service program outreach, a nuance here, and it often gets overlooked: if you do not participate in summer food service program, you do still have a responsibility to notify your families of where they can go to find meals during the summer, even if that's not from you. So a lot of times this might be a flyer that gets sent home. Again, it could be posted on social media or on school websites, but just ensure that you are conducting outreach in those two areas. So documentation, again, would just be, what are you providing to your families, letting them know where meals are available? And what can you do now? You can pull those materials and set them aside. If something's been posted on social media, maybe go find that social media post and take like a screenshot of it, whatever you need to do to be able to provide that for review. If you operate the after-school snack program, we will also be reviewing compliance with that program. So we will be confirming that snacks are meeting the snack meal pattern. We'll confirm that education and enrichment activities are part of the after-school snack program. And we will also validate counting and claiming procedures. So documentation for review would be your snack production records, daily snack meal counts, and your snack monitoring form. So just like for school lunch and school breakfast, on-site monitoring does need to occur with snack, and there is a form to complete for that. So to prepare, if you haven't already, go ahead and conduct that monitoring of your program now and just have that form ready for review. If you operate the special milk program, that also gets reviewed with the administrative review. So we'll take a look at your pricing policy. Is what you're charging for milk appropriate? We'll take a look at counting and claiming procedures, as well as service procedures. So documentation for review would be your daily milk counts, your milk order documentation, and the pricing. Or the participant eligibility documents. So to prepare, you can begin organizing those documents, organize your records, and then also observe service. Observation of special milk isn't necessarily a requirement, but again, it's a best practice. So you don't want anything to pop up and be a surprise. So go ahead if you can and observe it yourself and just make sure that everything is appropriate. If you operate the fresh fruit and vegetable program, that gets reviewed as well. So similar to the other programs, we will take a look at your claiming and make sure that that is accurate. We will validate that. Are the costs to the program allowable and are they supported? We will also review service of the fresh fruit and vegetable program and we'll confirm that it is occurring per requirements. Also, you want to make sure that your items being served under the fresh fruit and vegetable program are allowable under that program. So documentation for review would be invoices for the produce and supplies, and then your service documentation. So to prepare, you can set aside those invoices. And again, you can go do an observation of your own just to make sure that no surprises pop up. And if there are some issues or weaknesses, you can go ahead and get those addressed. Okay, so we've covered the areas of review. So we're just going to touch on communication. Again, you will be assigned a senior review specialist. And that's going to be the main person of contact between you and everyone else here at CNR. There are 3 planned phone calls that will happen over the course of the review. Again, just noting that these are planned, that doesn't mean you can only call us 3 times. You can call us whenever you need to. So that first phone call is the introduction call. So that is the senior review specialist calling to introduce themselves to you and kind of confirm some pieces of information for the review. The next call will be the financial review call that Catherine spoke about. And then the final scheduled call is that on-site preparation call that happens typically the week before your day of on-site review. And that's just to kind of tie up some loose ends, get some information needed for that on-site review day. And again, just you'll go over like a preliminary report. So it's really just a overview of where your review stands at that point. And then, like I said, collecting some information for the on-site reviewer. Again, I want to note that you can call your senior review specialist or SRS at any time throughout the process. They are your buddy through the process. They're there to assist you. You will get their contact information once they are assigned. So you'll know exactly how you can get in touch with them. The other form of communication will be emails. So your senior review specialist will be sending summary emails after those planned calls. And so you will have any information that you discuss with that SRS in writing and there for you to refer back to if needed. And then again, if you have any questions during the process, you can call or email your SRS at any time. Okay, that brings us to the end. So we've got some time for a little bit of Q&A. I think I see that there are some messages in the chat. So we may have gotten some questions there. So if Catherine hasn't addressed those, I'll take a look. But feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. That's what this time is for now.
Katie, two questions just came in, and I wasn't sure if you were able to see them. Or if you wanted me to read them to you, I didn't know what was easier.
Oh, no, I got them. Thank you.
Perfect.
So during the on-site review, if you have multiple sites, will you go to all sites? So it depends on how many sites is under that LEA. There are criteria, so we do not go to all of them. You will find out the selected sites when you have that introduction call with your senior review specialist. So you will know, you'll know which sites have been selected, but it will not necessarily be all sites, especially if you are a pretty large LEA. Staff that are hired mid-year need civil rights training, yes. Seems the chat maybe has slowed down. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes. Maybe you're working on questions. So we'll give everyone a few more minutes to either put their question in the chat, or again, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Okay, guys. Well, I don't see anything coming in. And I certainly want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know you guys all work hard and probably have some busy days to get back to. So we will go ahead and let you guys go. Again, thank you for your time this morning and attending this webinar. I hope you did find it helpful, and continue to find CNR helpful throughout the review process. A recording of this webinar will be available, and it will be sent to you from your senior review specialist. So if there are people who couldn't make it today, or you want to share this with other people in your organization, you will be able to do so once you receive the link. All right, everybody, thank you.